So this cues up, we're now going to take it down a little bit in terms of the practical. The next session, which is called Multidisciplinary Applications. For those of you who've heard me talk in the past, you recognize that I kind of divide the application world into three areas. Innovation in terms of new medical treatments, devices, et cetera. The regulatory science we've heard a lot about today, and then clinical translation into the practice. So the next session, we're going to have speakers who are going to cover one of each of those to show where we are in each domain, the topics, and we're going to start, in fact, I'd like to invite Kevin Sack from Medtronic, who's in the trenches doing exactly what Michael left behind and helping to introduce these new concepts to go be a change agent necessary to bring this world that we've heard about to life. So with that, please join me in welcoming Kevin to the stage.
Thank you, Steve. It is a real honor and pleasure to be here. A tough act to follow. My former employee, colleague, Michael Hill gave a great talk. I hope I can finish and join with. So my topic is about adopting in silico patient-driven development. That sounds like a little bit of a word soup. Let's see if we can go on this journey a little bit together. I'm going to try something a little bit new for myself. So I'm going to reach out to the audience and say, please join me along for this. There aren't any videos, so I hopefully won't have problems. But have you seen this slide before? Could you raise your hands if you've seen this slide before? Okay, can you raise your hand if you've seen this slide today? Okay, fantastic. And this is, I can't take credit for it. This is a fantastic slide because it does a job so well of showcasing the differences between how we're evaluating medical devices today and how we should be evaluating them in the future, right? And it is, for all us technically minded folks, it just snaps so clearly. It is so obvious how we're doing it today. We're using a little bit of modeling and simulation, but we're mostly relying on animal tests, cadavers, preclinical studies, which again are in animals, right? And it takes us years until we get up into the point where we put our first device in a real patient and get that realistic human environment. Compared to how it should be, right? It should be that we're using in silico modeling to bring that first human environment all the way up front to the start of the cycle of development. That we're evaluating using virtual patients in silico clinical trials to accelerate and bring a much more realistic environment to our development process. And this could save us time, bring better products to market, and ultimately serve the patients better. Now, the reason that a lot of you have seen this before is because this isn't really a new idea, is it? I mean, Michael did an excellent job of showcasing how we've seen a roadmap every 7 years, really, showcasing how the in silico modeling is going to revolutionize medicine. And we've been saying for ages, it's revolutionized the other industries, right? We've seen how it's revolutionized the automotive, the aeronautical, structural, and we've been talking for a while now saying that it's going to happen. It's going to revolutionize the healthcare industry. And we need it. You know, we need it now more than ever. Clinical trials are expected to just get more and more expensive. We are currently running clinical trials that are more complicated than ever, right? And we're doing this both in terms of how we are choosing our patients, right? So the inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria are getting more complicated. Our endpoints are getting more complicated in what we're trying to track. And this serves to just make it, 1, more costly, 2, longer to enroll patients, and 3, that means ultimately that we're getting devices to market much later. And what are we getting for this? Our success rate hasn't really improved. Clinical trials for medical devices remain with the success rate between 50 to 70%. And I guarantee you, every single medical device company that brings a product to clinical trial has a confidence rate that exceeds 90%. Right? So clearly there's a mismatch now. Now we need this revolution, and we've been talking about it for ages. So my ultimate hypothesis is, what happened? What happened to the modeling and simulation revolution? We've been talking about it for ages. How is our industry so different to these other industries that have been transformed by in silico modeling? And I guess the first most obvious answer to that could be that maybe the scientists in those industries are just better than us. And maybe that's true, but for the sake of my vanity, I'd like to think there are some other reasons, and so I'm going to take you with what I think some of those reasons might be. And the first, and we have to address this, is the scale of prototypes is very different. If we are building a rocket ship, we don't have time to make prototypes. It is incredibly expensive and timely to create some of these marvelous constructions of engineering. Right? You are going to spend every single dollar you have up front to try and make sure it is as successful as possible before you even put the first nut and bolt together. Right? Compare that with maybe a coronary stent, which, to be honest, costs in the dollars. Right? It's not expensive. It comes from nitinol tubes that we laser cut. In fact, if I have to model one of those, it will probably take me longer to do all the V and V40 applications that I need, from meshing and verification all the way through to I get a model that's usable, than it will be for some of our prefab engineers to mock up a few in the lab and test them. Right? So that's one of our first challenges, is that sometimes in healthcare, it might be easier to just build a prototype. Another huge challenge for us that is maybe different is, I think it's quite clear in some of these other industries that these are engineering problems. If you're constructing a superstructure, you are going to consult structural and civil engineers. You're going to ask those subject matter experts, how do we solve this? And you're going to follow their advice when they say we need an FEA model of this to understand if the structure can support the loads that we intend to apply to it. As opposed to, we're developing a new surgical tool. Is that a healthcare problem or an engineering problem? Do we need to ask an engineer to solve it, or do we want a surgeon to drive the solution? Michael spoke a lot about stakeholders. I've got to agree, we have really diverse stakeholders, both external and internal. So looking at a medical device company, we have the most important stakeholders, the patients and physicians, right? But we also have regulatory that we work very closely with that are external. And internally, we have a really diverse team. We've got design and test engineers, we've got research and development engineers, manufacturing, regulatory roles, clinicians, and leadership and marketing. And these are, the question that comes to mind is, who's taking the leading role and who is deciding how much modeling and simulation is used? A big challenge can be when a product is being developed and you're allocating resources and mapping out, is you might have someone who doesn't understand how modeling and simulation is valuable, deciding how much to allocate and bring in modeling and simulation. And all of these diverse stakeholders, usually we do really well with design and test engineers. They get it. They get the value of modeling and simulation, right? Automatically, they want to bring us in, help us design, help us build better tests. But if we're not bringing in the development, manufacturing, regulatory roles, if they're not seeing the value of modeling and simulation, those are all opportunities for modeling and simulation to get cut or limited scope or removed from projects. Talking about some of our stakeholders, I think we also have to recognize that there's certain biases out there. For decades now, the controlled double-blind clinical trial is the gold standard of how we evaluate medical devices. And we have been pushing that as a healthcare industry for decades. And what that essentially is doing is it's saying that how we know something is safe or not is because we observe it. We look at empirical results. We're going to throw it in a whole bunch of patients and see if it works. We're not quite sure, the body is too complicated to model, but we're going to look at just what the outcome is. Does it work or not? As opposed to trying to understand the fundamental mechanisms of action. And this is really a massive challenge that I would say we face. And it's not because physicians aren't smart. Some of the smartest scientists I know are physicians. But they've got a different bias in terms of how they value evidence generation. We show them models, and sometimes the first response is, this is an incredible model. What you've done is fantastic. Now can you go run it in a cohort of patients so I can get a statistically significant number of data points, because this is just an N of 1. And you know how hard that is? I mean, we have to consistently, and it's probably me, right? It's probably me and my team, we don't do a good enough job of explaining, of saying that we do these large statistical trials because you want to know if A and B is better, and you can't put both in the same patients. They're in two different patients. So maybe it's better because of the patients. So we have to enroll many patients to overcome that statistical variability. While here in a model, we can remove that. We can isolate signal and noise. We can elucidate the fundamental mechanisms. And we need to do a better job of explaining that and bringing up the legitimacy of different types of evidence. We need more physician scientists like David Hoganson and Daniel Burkhoff, people that get it to help be stakeholders and advocates for us. And finally, this is a big one, is that there is an organizational bias that we need to overcome. And we have built this massive, massive machine, right, that takes hundreds of people to run, thousands of people, to evaluate safe medical devices. And it's not just inertia, right? I mean, think of it. We've been telling what medical device company says, trust us with our new products. We are using the most latest novel ways to evaluate it, right? We say, trust us. We've built many devices before. We know how to do this. And we're going to use that same playbook going forward. Now, it's not just that we're going to have to change the way we do things. We're going to have to bring people along with us that are stuck in their ways. And we're not unique to this. We were joking about this last night, right? There's a huge legacy inertia that we see in other industries. The Department of Defense was using floppy disks up until 2019. If you want the IRS to send you a form or to send them, you have to fax them. I mean, fax in 2025, right? It is hard for us to replace things that are working. And to a lot of people, the way we do things works. Or there's a performance bias, right? I did this the last medical device, and that worked. Why should I change it with the new one? So how do we overcome these? That's a huge challenge for us. So I have some ideas. I'm not going to be naive enough to think that there is one solution to any of this, and I'm not going to have as much hubris to say that I know what all the solutions are, but I'm going to share with what I think are some solutions that have worked inside Medtronic for us to move the needle and increase the adoption of patient-specific modeling, bringing it further into the device development cycle. And the first one, which is really the theme of the conference, which is coincidental, is that credibility and trust are first and foremost, and they have to be earned. And this is really the thing, right? There's no shortcuts to it. We have to, and we're not talking about model credibility. That VNV40 has been around, we know how to do that. We're talking about credibility in the engineers that are performing these tasks. We need to be consistent and deliver and add value. And that means taking on even the small problems and working our way up to the larger ones. Because we know how trust and credibility works, right? It's intent, integrity, it's capability, and it's performance. And if we get these things right, we can solve all of those problems. They map back to all four of those challenges. The second is that modeling and simulation needs to scale. And I don't mean that in the AI sense. I mean that we need to be more flexible and we need to be more robust. I can't build a VNV40 verified model all the way through the life cycle to answer small problems. We need to have different classifications of small and large problems. We need to be answered different types of physics. We need to be fast on our feet to answer the big questions, but also the little ones. The first thing I ask when I get brought into a project where they want to use modeling and simulation is, how quickly do you need an answer? Right? Sometimes I'll use a 1D beam model. We can simplify and analyze just the one part we need. Sometimes it'll be a cohort of patients. The next, communication is going to be critical, right? We have many stakeholders. The only way we're going to bring modeling and simulation much further into the development cycle is if we learn to speak the language that stakeholders that are outside the technical realm understand and can connect to. This is fundamental, right? This is fundamental to bring along the key people that will move the needle forward. And finally, computational engineers need to integrate cross-functionally. I can't tell you how many modelers I see who have never held in their hands the devices that they're modeling. They've never seen or spoken to a patient. They have never or seen, if they might have been modeling the heart for 10 years and they've never seen a heart, explanted or in a lab or played around with it. And this is absolutely critical, right? We can't be stuck in our silos as technical engineers if we want modeling and simulation to be leveraged across the device lifecycle. Then we have to go out there and see the device in the different stages of the device lifecycle. We need with the test engineers, seeing how the bench performances are going. We need to go speak to patients. We need to be in the OR. We need to observe how our product is being used to form our own perceptions of where modeling and simulation can be applied. Because about half the time, when modeling and simulation gets pulled in to answer a question, that's not the question the project actually needs answered. Sometimes you need to go take a step back and say, wait, you want me to model a few cases of this, but why? What are you trying to solve? And then we can untangle it together and work out what the real problem is. And we can only do that and have that interchange if there's trust and credibility, if I know how to communicate, right? And if I'm going out there and seeing these problems firsthand. Which leads to the final, I think, commonality is we need to find the gaps in our organizations. We know the current way we're evaluating things is not optimal, right? And so we need to go out there and work out where can we add value. We can't sit around waiting to be pulled in. We're designing a new clinical trial. We're choosing a new prototype for an animal study. How are those decisions being made? How are we choosing inclusion criteria? If it's just from a panel of medical experts, I've sat in a talk when we said we should exclude patients that have any mitral valve regurgitation. This was for a pacing therapy that we're enrolling for. We said, how is pacing going to interact with mitral valve regurgitation? Why would we exclude those patients? And the physicians go, oh, those patients don't do as well as others. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, but we can't rely on the zeitgeist or intuition. We've got to go out there as modelers and say, okay, brilliant idea, let's explore it. Let's prove your intuition correct. Let's make decisions that are going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars based on evidence and data and not intuition. Intuition is powerful and it's fantastic and often it's right, but that's not how medical devices should be evaluated, right? We can make decisions using modeling and simulation, and that means maybe the clinical study can only track certain endpoints and modeling and simulation can track the others. Maybe we can complement the data, find where those gaps are, and use modeling to shore them up. Now, I'd like to end with a note saying that these are the things that we've been doing at Medtronic, and I think they've been working. I've been at Medtronic 7 years, and while I haven't seen the modeling and simulation revolution take over and see everything integrated, I have seen a mental revolution. I have seen the adoption of modeling and simulation, which was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. 50% of the people you would ask would be on the fence, saying, it's a toy, it's interesting, it's not applicable for some of the heavy-duty stuff that we're doing, to us now being in a stage where I believe every single person at Medtronic sees the value in modeling and simulation, and it's about how we leverage it in the best way. Currently, we touch the entire medical device lifecycle, everything from feasibility concepts, and some of those are really rough and dirty models. I would be embarrassed to share them with some other technical folks. And we also submit things to the FDA, which are some of the finest models I've ever seen. And we touch everything from pre-market development all the way to post-market releases. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. And Kevin, as many of you know, I introduced last year, Kevin began his career as a student working in the Living Heart Project before joining Medtronic. And so he's watched us through the entirety of it, and he now is one of the change agents bringing this new evolution to Medtronic. So this is the kind of change that we're all bringing as a community. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.